Proportions can also be used to answer some what-if questions. Now, in this video, we are given information for K through 12 education expenditures for 5 states, along with their populations. Now, this is actual information, but we can answer questions like, what would be the expected value of K through 12 expenditures in Indiana if Indiana spent like Illinois? So the key here is recognizing that you're playing a what-if game. You're saying, let's pretend Indiana isn't really Indiana. We do everything just like Illinois. How would that change what we spend? So when I set these up, because sometimes it's hard to decide where does my X go, because I know everything. Well, that's true, but remember we're playing the what-if game. So we're comparing Indiana to Illinois. Now, it says, and this is, I always start with my X because that's kind of the key. What would be the expected value of expenditures in Indiana? Okay, so we're going to do money on top, people on the bottom. It's the only information we have, right? We have money and we have people. So if we're looking for the expected value of expenditures in Indiana, that's what we expected value. How much would Indiana spend if it was like Illinois? So once you have the X, and the X is wherever it says expected value, everything else you fill in with what you know. So I know that Illinois spends $25.6 billion. And I know that there are 12.8 million people in Illinois, and there are 6.5 million people in Indiana. And you will notice I didn't put any labels on any of those, because I know that, and it's consistent, all the people are in millions, all the money is in billions. If I'm consistent, I just have to remember to put that label on at the end. So when I find X for Indiana, I'm going to slap the word billion on at the end. So now I cross multiply just like I would with any proportion. So 12.8x equals 166.4. I divide both sides by 12.8, and I end up with a value of, it's hard to see that, approximately $13 billion. So if Indiana spent money like Illinois, they would have spent $13 billion instead of the 9.9 that they spent. So this allows us to have a comparison. We actually spent 9.9 billion, but if we were like Illinois, we would have spent 13 billion. So you can play the comparison game of what we did and what we should have or could have done had we been like somebody else. All right, so using that same table, if the amount of K through 12 educational expenses in Illinois were proportional to those in Indiana, what would have been the expected value of K through 12 expenditures in Illinois? So now we're using the same 2 states. We're using Indiana and Illinois, but the difference is, we're still going to use money and population. Now we're looking at expected value of expenditures in Illinois. Now we're finding X here. So the last problem, we said, what if Indiana was like Illinois? This problem is, what if Illinois was like Indiana? So we go in and we say, okay, remember there are, oops, wrong button. There are 12.8 million people in Illinois. There are 6.5 million people in Indiana, and Indiana spent $9.9 billion on education. So I cross multiply. 6.5x equals 126.72. I divide both sides by 6.5, and Illinois would have spent 19.5 billion, because remember expenditures are in billion, if they had spent like Indiana. Now, the actual, it doesn't ask for this, but just for fun, the actual in Illinois, if you recall, is 25.6 billion. So Illinois would have saved roughly $5.1 billion if they had spent on education the same in proportion to what Indiana had. All right? So this is just a what if. What if Illinois was just like Indiana? All right, let's do one more of these. Let's compare Ohio and Kentucky. Okay, so Ohio, Kentucky. Again, we're going to put money on top. We're going to put people on the bottom. But where does the X go? Let's start with that. Find the expected value in Kentucky expected value in Kentucky, that goes here, if Kentucky were proportional to Ohio. So, how many people are in Kentucky? Well, if you go back, there are 4.4 million people in Kentucky. There are 11.6 million people in Ohio, right? A lot of people in Ohio. And Ohio spent roughly $19.3 billion on education. All right, so let's go ahead and cross multiply. 11.6x equals, we go the other way, 84.92. Divide both sides by 11.6. And if Kentucky spent like Ohio, they should have spent $7.3 billion on K through 12 education. Well, how does this compare to the actual? Well, the actual was, let me find it in Kentucky, $6.4 billion. So if Kentucky was like Ohio, they would have spent about just shy of $1 billion, about $0.92 billion more is what they would have spent if they were spending like Ohio. Instead, they saved themselves nearly $1 billion by making their own decisions. All right, so even if you have all of the information, as we do in this table, you can still play the what if game and work through some proportions that way.